Mr. Chairman, I have but 5 minutes to ensure that this goes by voice, so I'll do my best. No one here doubts 100% of the time the responsible party from the just above the ground to over 60,000 feet belongs to the FAA. Any decision about whether an aircraft can operate or cannot operate belongs exclusively to the FAA. For that reason, the FAA is an independent body that has a responsibility to take and should take seriously the implementation of NOTAMs. These NOTAMs either caution pilots or prevent pilots from flying. Recently, there have been a number of requests where the FAA has acted not on behalf of its own judgment, but on behalf of a request by another agency. These agencies include CBP, Department of Justice, FBI, FTC, and many others. These come in regularly, and I have no objection. There are plenty of good reasons that an entity we were just talking about a little while ago, the Park Service, might even have a request. But because the FAA has an obligation to make airspace available wherever possible and at the lowest level of regulation and the greatest freedom and safety for the pilots, and it does have the obligation when, for safety and other reasons, there need to be temporary or permanent prohibitions on flying to implement them. My amendment simply puts a requirement that when the FAA does so, they do so based on, and I quote, FAA to make an independent and objective judgment when it receives NOTAM requests from other agency. I hope that my 5 minutes has been well spent, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman for what purposes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, seek recognition?
Thank you. I claim time in opposition to the amendment filed by Mr. Issa.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I oppose this amendment, which would require the FAA to make an independent assessment of each notice to air mission, or NOTAM, request from a non-federal entity. Many NOTAMs are simply for general awareness. A temporary crane has been erected in controlled airspace, or a runway at an airport with no air traffic control tower is being repaved. Some NOTAMs increase airspace awareness for pilots in the area, alerting them about drone operations or balloon flights, some of them from China. Some of them result in actual flight restrictions, like over sports stadiums during an NFL or MLB game, or when there's a concert going on. Sometimes the FAA requires an operator or an airport to file a NOTAM prior to operation in order to provide safety information for other airspace users. These are submitted through a special controlled access system. NOTAMs are issued for all kinds of reasons, as we all know from the NOTAM system outage earlier this year. There are many of them, which can be a blessing and it can be a curse. For example, French Valley Airport, which is a small county-owned public use general aviation airport in Riverside County, California, currently has 80 active NOTAMs within the 10-mile radius. There are tens of thousands of big, medium, and small airports and heliports all over the country, and consider the magnitude of bureaucracy this amendment would require. Requiring the FAA to independently verify every single NOTAM would bring an already cumbersome system to a complete standstill. NOTAMs keep pilots safe. This amendment will create an enormously burdensome process to get NOTAMs issued. Finally, this amendment will very likely conflict with recommendations from the NOTAM working group created by the NOTAM Improvement Act that this Congress passed less than 2 months ago. I urge all members to vote no. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Chairman, I yield myself additional time as I may consume. I appreciate the gentleman's comments, and he's absolutely right. There are a great many NOTAMs. And I want to remind everyone that the requirement in this amendment that it requires the FAA to make an independent and objective judgment does not mean that it must do independent research as to the validity of the request as far as background. It can, in fact, take at the word an agency's statement of its reason, but it has to make an independent judgment as to the NOTAM. Now, I'm both a pilot of more than 40 years, but I'm also a former Army officer, and I can tell you, at the company, the battalion, the brigade level, every unit in the military has a staff duty officer who, for the entire evening through until morning and over weekends, makes judgment on behalf of the commanding officer at that level. Why do they have that? Because a level of review should always be available. It doesn't have to be extensive, but it does have to be sufficient that if it came through the FAA, it would independently be looked at by the duty officer before it was put up as a NOTAM. The same is asked. Nowhere in my amendment does it prohibit delegation all the way down to the lowest level. As a matter of fact, nowhere in this does it prohibit the use of AI and other tools to help them do it. So I think this is not burdensome, easily compliable, but it does say that the FAA makes the decision, not an agency that plugs into a system who may not have the mandate, responsibility, or even the expertise to do so. And periodic NOTAMs that have had to be pulled back when they've been submitted by other agencies are the reason for this amendment, so we have actual examples where the FAA would not have done it had they made an independent decision. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
How much time do I have remaining, sir?
The gentleman has 3.5 minutes.
And how much time does the opposition have?
The gentleman has 1 minute.
1 minute. Well, I would just reiterate the fact that this will add additional burdens to the FAA. They would have to independently verify every single NOTAM. And the FAA is already overburdened with work, and they need more and more folks there to make our civil aeronautics system work properly. And the amendment would conflict with recommendations just passed a few months ago by the NOTAM working group for improvement of that act. And that was just passed 2 months ago. So I have to cite those same reasons for opposing the amendment and continue to oppose, and I reserve my time.
He reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I yield myself. Briefly, in statement to my colleague from Tennessee, the vast majority of FAA NOTAMs do not originate from outside agencies. This is a fraction of all NOTAMs, and it is only those that will be affected by this amendment, and I reserve.
Gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Reserve.
Is it,
gentleman
if I can inquire, is the gentleman prepared to close?
After you close.
That's what the question was. Yes. Okay, then in
gentleman
closing.
From California is recognized.
Okay. In closing, this is not what some who oppose it would say. This is, in fact, a very minor one, but it comes with specific requirements that exist for a reason. Agencies have chosen and actually embarrassed the FAA by asking for a closing of airspace only to find out in the light of day, in a matter of days, that, in fact, it was a huge mistake, sometimes politically driven, but it doesn't matter why. The FAA has the right and the responsibility, and all we ask for is when it comes from an outside agency that it, in fact, have a once-over before being codified. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from California yields. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Issa is a worthy adversary, but it's still 40 love, and I would ask everybody to vote no, and I would close. And I'd yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Tennessee yields. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
I'd like to request a roll call vote.
A roll call vote.
Thank you. Positive.
Does the gentleman request a recorded vote?
Yes, yes.
Yes, I think I did that.
Recorded vote has been requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on